The flour barrel cracked open with a sound like breaking bones, and Beatrice Brennan watched her father shake hands with the stranger as if she were nothing more than another sack of grain. The year was 1872, and the afternoon sun beat down on Leavenworth, Kansas, with the kind of heat that made men desperate and women invisible. Her father, red-faced and sweating through his threadbare shirt, couldn't meet her eyes as he pocketed the $5 the merchant had thrown in alongside the 50-pound sack of flour, sealing a bargain that would change everything Beatrice thought she knew about worth and dignity. She was 22 years old, and until that moment, she had believed her father loved her at least a little. The merchant, a fat man named Silas Pettigrew with tobacco stains on his vest, grabbed her arm with thick fingers that smelled of lard and sweat. He pulled her toward his wagon without ceremony, without gentleness, as if she were livestock he had just purchased at auction. Beatrice stumbled but caught herself, refusing to fall, refusing to give either man the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Her mother had died 3 years earlier from fever, and her 2 younger brothers had succumbed to the same illness within days of each other. Her father had never recovered from the loss, had taken to drinking cheap whiskey and gambling away what little money they had left from selling their small farm outside of town. But this was a betrayal so profound that Beatrice felt something inside her chest go cold and hard as river stone. She climbed into the wagon because what choice did she have? Running would mean starving on the plains alone, and fighting would likely earn her a beating. Pettigrew owned the largest general store in Leavenworth, and he had been eyeing her for months, making comments about her dark hair and slim figure whenever she came in to buy supplies on credit they could never repay. Now she understood. Her father's debt had grown too large, and she was the only currency he had left to spend. The wagon lurched forward, and Beatrice gripped the wooden seat to keep from sliding across the rough planks. Pettigrew hummed tunelessly beside her, occasionally glancing her way with a possessive satisfaction that made her stomach turn. They rode through the center of town, past the saloons and the hotel, past the livery stable where horses stamped and whinnied in their stalls, past the church, where her mother was buried in the cemetery behind the white painted building. People stared, and Beatrice kept her chin up, her eyes forward, determined not to show the shame and rage burning through her veins like poison. Pettigrew lived above his store in a series of cramped rooms that smelled of dust and old bacon grease. He hauled her up the narrow stairs and shoved her into what would become her prison. The main room held a sagging settee, a pot-bellied stove, and a table covered with dirty dishes. 2 other rooms branched off from it, a bedroom and a small kitchen with a water pump that groaned when she tried it later. He told her she would cook and clean and do whatever else he required, and the way he said it made his meaning clear as creek water. That first night, Beatrice wedged a chair under the door handle of the tiny storage closet where he told her she would sleep. She sat in the darkness on a pile of musty blankets, dry-eyed and trembling with fury rather than fear. She would not cry. She would not break. She would survive this, and somehow she would find a way out. The alternatives were unthinkable. Morning came too quickly. Pettigrew pounded on her door at dawn, shouting for breakfast. Beatrice emerged and made coffee and fried eggs in a skillet crusted with old food, scrubbing it first while he watched her with those calculating pig eyes. He ate like an animal, yolk running down his chin, and then left for the store downstairs, locking the door to the outside stairwell behind him. She was trapped. The windows overlooked Main Street 2 stories below, too high to jump without breaking bones. She cleaned. It gave her something to do besides think about her father's face, besides imagine putting her hands around Pettigrew's thick neck. She scrubbed floors and washed windows and beat the dust from the threadbare curtains. She found a crate of books in the bedroom closet, probably belonging to Pettigrew's late wife, and in the afternoons when he was busy in the store, she read them hungrily, desperate for any escape, even one that existed only in her mind. The pattern continued for 3 weeks. Pettigrew grew bolder, standing too close, touching her waist or her shoulder with his damp hands. Beatrice learned to move away quickly, to always keep furniture between them, to never let herself be cornered. But she knew it was only a matter of time. He was waiting for something, perhaps for her to accept her situation, to stop flinching away. She could see the impatience growing in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when she slipped past him in the narrow hallway. Then Zachary Hawthorne rode into Leavenworth on a hot August afternoon, his horse exhausted and his provisions nearly gone. He was a cowboy, 26 years old, with sun-darkened skin and pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He had been driving cattle from Texas to the railhead at Abilene when his horse threw a shoe and came up lame. He needed supplies, a blacksmith, and a few days of rest before continuing on to meet the rest of his outfit further north. He hitched his horse outside Pettigrew's general store and climbed the steps, his spurs jingling with each movement. Beatrice was downstairs that afternoon by pure chance. Pettigrew had sent her to fetch a particular ledger from the office behind the main counter, and she was searching through the messy desk when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and saw the cowboy, tall and lean and dusty from the trail, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. Not hunger or calculation, but simple human recognition, as if she were a person rather than a possession. Zachary saw her too. He saw the way she stood very still, the ledger clutched against her chest like a shield. He saw the fading bruise on her forearm, barely visible beneath her sleeve, and the wariness in her dark eyes. He had 3 sisters back in Texas, and he knew the look of a woman in trouble. Pettigrew bustled out from the storeroom, all false friendliness and merchant's charm. He quoted Zachary prices on flour and coffee and dried beans, on oats for his horse and tobacco for himself. Zachary paid in silver dollars, counting them out carefully on the scarred wooden counter, and all the while he was aware of the young woman standing frozen near the office door. When Pettigrew called her over sharply, saying her name like a curse, "Beatrice, get these supplies packed up," Zachary watched her hurry to obey, her movements quick and nervous as a deer sensing wolves. He made a decision then, though he could not have said exactly why. Maybe it was the way Pettigrew looked at her, possessive and cruel. Maybe it was the proud set of her shoulders despite the fear in her eyes. Maybe it was just that Zachary Hawthorne had never been able to walk away from someone who needed help, a trait that had gotten him into trouble more than once in his 26 years. He came back the next day, claiming he needed more supplies, and the day after that. He made excuses, bought things he did not really need, and each time he found ways to exchange a few words with Beatrice when Pettigrew was distracted. He learned that she had been traded to the merchant for a debt. He learned that she was kept locked in the rooms upstairs. He learned that she was desperately unhappy, but trying hard not to show it. And she learned about him. That he was a cowboy who had been working cattle drives since he was 16. That his family had a small ranch outside of San Antonio. That he was honest and straightforward in a way that seemed almost impossible after weeks of living with Pettigrew's sly cruelty. Zachary spoke to her as if her opinions mattered, as if she were someone worth listening to, and Beatrice found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that frightened her. On the 5th day, Pettigrew noticed. He saw the way Beatrice's face changed when the cowboy walked in, saw the way Zachary's gaze followed her around the store. That evening, after Zachary had left, Pettigrew climbed the stairs and told Beatrice she would not be coming down to the store anymore. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks and pulled her close, his breath hot and rancid against her face. He told her she had been bought and paid for, and it was time she started acting grateful. Beatrice slapped him. Her hand connected with his fleshy cheek with a crack that seemed to echo in the small room. For a moment, they both stood frozen, shocked. Then Pettigrew backhanded her across the mouth, sending her sprawling against the settee. Blood bloomed hot and copper on her lip. He stood over her, breathing hard, and Beatrice braced herself for worse. But footsteps sounded on the outside stairs and someone knocked loudly on the door. Pettigrew cursed and went to answer it, smoothing his hair and his expression. It was Zachary. He stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, and asked Pettigrew if he might purchase one of his horses. He had seen a decent-looking mare in the stable behind the store, and he needed a spare mount for the journey ahead. Pettigrew, distracted by the possibility of profit, ushered him downstairs to discuss terms, locking the apartment door behind him. Beatrice sat on the settee, shaking, her hand pressed to her bleeding mouth. She knew what would happen when Pettigrew came back. She knew she could not stay here any longer. But where could she go? She had no money, no family who would take her in, no friends who could help her against a man like Pettigrew. 20 minutes later, the door unlocked and Zachary came in alone. Beatrice jumped to her feet, startled and confused. The cowboy closed the door quietly behind him and looked at her with those pale blue eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "We do not have much time," he said quietly. "Pettigrew is saddling the mare. I told him I wanted to check the tack on his saddles, that I would meet him out back. You need to get whatever you want to take with you right now." "I do not understand," Beatrice whispered, though hope was already rising in her chest like water from a spring. "I am getting you out of here," Zachary said. "You are coming with me, unless you want to stay." He phrased it as a question, giving her the choice that no one else had offered in weeks. "I want to leave," Beatrice said, and her voice was steady despite the tears that suddenly blurred her vision. "I want to leave more than anything." "Then get your things. Anything that is yours, be quick." She ran to the closet that served as her room. She had almost nothing. A change of clothes, a brush that had been her mother's, a small daguerreotype of her family taken before the fever came. She wrapped them in a shawl and hurried back to where Zachary waited. He took her arm, not roughly like Pettigrew but gently, and led her down the inside stairs to the store. They slipped through the darkened aisles and out the front door into the late afternoon sunlight. Zachary's horse was still tied at the hitching post. He untied the reins and helped Beatrice mount, then swung up behind her. The horse shifted under the double weight but steadied at Zachary's quiet word. They heard shouting from behind the store, Pettigrew's voice raised in anger. Zachary touched his heels to the horse's sides, and they moved off at a quick trot that became a canter as they turned onto the road leading out of town. Beatrice expected pursuit. She expected Pettigrew to come after them with a gun or a rope, expected the sheriff to stop them before they reached the edge of town. But nothing happened. They rode past the last buildings, past the church and the cemetery, out onto the open prairie that stretched endlessly in every direction. The horses' hooves drummed against the hard, packed earth, and the wind pulled at Beatrice's hair. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she could breathe. They rode until dark, putting miles between themselves and Leavenworth. Zachary finally slowed the horse when they reached a creek lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. He dismounted and helped Beatrice down, his hand steady on her waist. She stumbled slightly when her feet touched the ground, her legs stiff from the long ride. "We will camp here tonight," Zachary said. "It is not safe to travel in the dark, and my horse needs rest." Beatrice nodded, suddenly uncertain now that the adrenaline of escape was fading. She watched as Zachary unsaddled his horse and rubbed the animal down with handfuls of grass, then hobbled it so it could graze near the water. He moved with the easy competence of someone who had done these tasks 1,000 times, and Beatrice found herself studying him in the dying light. He was handsome in a weather-beaten way, with strong features and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though he was serious now. He built a small fire and set coffee to boil in a battered pot. He had some jerky and hardtack in his saddlebags, and he shared it with her without comment. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, and for a long time, neither spoke. The prairie night settled around them, vast and star-filled, and Beatrice felt simultaneously more free and more lost than she had ever been in her life. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "You did not have to do that. You did not have to help me." Zachary looked up from the tin cup of coffee he was holding. The firelight played across his face, making his eyes seem darker. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "I could not leave you there, not with him. He will be angry. He might come after us. Let him try." There was a hard edge to Zachary's voice now. "He had no right to you. No man has the right to buy another person to treat them like property. My father thought he did. He sold me for a sack of flour and $5. The bitterness in Beatrice's voice surprised even her. "Your father was wrong. You are worth more than all the gold out west. You are worth more than any price could measure." Zachary said it with such conviction that Beatrice felt something crack open inside her chest. Some frozen place that had been locked away since the moment her father shook hands with Pettigrew. She looked down at her hands, at the bruises on her wrist in the shape of Pettigrew's fingers. "I do not feel worth very much right now." "Then I will remind you until you believe it," Zachary said quietly. He poured more coffee and handed the cup across to her. Their fingers brushed, and Beatrice felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire or the hot tin in her hands. They talked late into the night, their voices low and careful, sharing pieces of themselves like precious gifts. Beatrice told him about her mother and brothers, about the farm and the fever that had taken them all. She told him about her father's decline, about the gambling and drinking, about the debt that had grown until it swallowed everything. She did not tell him about the last 3 weeks in Pettigrew's apartment, could not yet find the words for that particular shame and fear, but she thought perhaps he understood anyway from the things she left unsaid. Zachary told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 4 children and the only son. He told her about learning to ride and rope from his father, about long days in the saddle and nights sleeping under the stars. He told her about the cattle drives, the danger and the boredom, the camaraderie of the cowboys and the loneliness of the trail. He told her he had been saving money for 3 years, planning to start his own ranch, to build something that belonged to him alone. "What will you do now?" Beatrice asked as the fire burned down to embers. "You were heading to meet your outfit." "I was," Zachary agreed. "But plans change. I will take you somewhere safe first, somewhere you can start over. I have no money. I have nothing to pay you for your help. I am not asking for payment." Zachary's voice was firm. "I am asking you to trust me. Can you do that?" Beatrice looked at him across the dying fire, this stranger who had ridden into her life and changed everything. She thought about trust, about how her father had broken it beyond repair, about how Pettigrew had tried to grind it into dust. But Zachary's eyes were steady and honest, and he had given her a choice when no one else had. "Yes," she said. "I can trust you." They slept on opposite sides of the fire. Zachary wrapped in his bedroll and Beatrice in the blanket he insisted she take. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the prairie night, the distant howl of a coyote and the rustle of wind through grass. She thought about the cowboy sleeping a few feet away, about the words he had spoken with such certainty. "You are worth more than all the gold out west." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way he did, as if she were someone remarkable rather than just another burden to bear. She fell asleep finally, lulled by exhaustion and the strange new feeling of being safe. They woke at dawn and rode on, heading northwest away from Leavenworth. Zachary said he had friends in Abilene, people who might help Beatrice find work and a place to live. It was 2 days' ride, maybe 3 if they took their time and let the horse rest. Beatrice agreed without hesitation. She had nowhere else to go, no other options, and Abilene was far enough from Pettigrew that she might be able to disappear into the crowds of cowboys and drovers that flooded the town during cattle season. The first day passed in relative silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, broken only by occasional stands of trees along creek beds and the rare sight of a distant homestead. They saw a wagon train heading west, the white canvas tops bright against the blue sky, and once they passed a rider heading south who tipped his hat but did not stop to talk. That evening they made camp near another creek, and Zachary shot a rabbit for dinner. Beatrice helped him prepare it, working together over the fire, and the domesticity of the moment struck her as both strange and comfortable. She had cooked for Pettigrew, but that had been coercion, a requirement of her captivity. This was different. This was a choice, 2 people working together because they wanted to, not because one owned the other. "Where did you learn to cook?" Zachary asked as she turned the rabbit on its spit, the fat dripping and sizzling in the flames. "My mother taught me. Before she died, she made sure I knew all the household skills I would need: cooking, sewing, preserving food, keeping accounts." Beatrice smiled sadly. "She wanted me to be prepared for marriage, for running my own home someday. She never imagined I would be traded for flour." "That was not marriage," Zachary said sharply. "That was slavery. There is a difference. The law would not see it that way. My father had the right to settle his debts however he chose, and Pettigrew paid, so in the eyes of the law the transaction was legal. The law is not always right." Zachary poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkening sky. "During the war, the law said a lot of things were right that were not. My father fought for the Union because he believed every person had the right to own themselves, to choose their own path. That did not change just because the war ended." Beatrice studied him in the firelight. "You are younger than I thought at first. You would have been just a child during the war." "I was 9 when it started, 14 when it ended, old enough to remember." He looked at her directly. "Old enough to know that freedom is not just for some people. It is for everyone, or it means nothing." They ate the rabbit and shared more coffee, and Beatrice felt something shifting between them, some understanding deepening. Zachary was not just helping her out of pity or obligation. He was helping her because he believed she deserved help, because he saw her as a person with the same rights and dignity as anyone else. It was such a simple thing, and yet it meant everything. On the second day of riding, they talked more easily. Beatrice found herself telling Zachary about the books she had loved as a child, the stories of adventure and romance that her mother had read aloud on winter evenings. Zachary told her about the places he had seen on the cattle drives, the mountains and rivers and endless plains, the sudden storms and the perfect sunsets. They discovered they had both always wanted to see the ocean, that neither of them liked the taste of whiskey, that they both believed in ghosts even though they had never seen one. The conversation flowed naturally, and Beatrice realized with a start that she was enjoying herself. Despite everything that had happened, despite the fear and uncertainty of her situation, she was happy in this moment. Riding across the prairie with this cowboy who had saved her, who made her laugh and listened when she talked, who looked at her as if she mattered. They stopped in the afternoon to rest the horse and themselves. Zachary showed Beatrice how to check the animal's hooves for stones, how to tell if it was favoring one leg or showing signs of lameness. He taught her how to tighten a saddle properly, how to adjust the stirrups, small skills that she absorbed eagerly. Knowledge meant independence, and independence meant freedom. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Zachary said, "Tell me what you want, Beatrice. Not what you think you should want or what someone else wants for you. What do you want for yourself?" No one had ever asked her that before. Beatrice stared into the flames, thinking, what did she want? A month ago, she would have said a home, a family, the simple security of knowing where her next meal was coming from. But now, "I want to be free," she said slowly. "I want to make my own choices. I want to work and earn money that belongs to me. I want to wake up in the morning without being afraid. I want to be seen as more than just something to be bought or sold or used up." "You deserve all of that," Zachary said, "and you will have it, I promise you. You cannot promise that. You cannot know what will happen." "No," he admitted. "But I can promise that I will help you get it, that I will not abandon you or betray you, that as long as you need a friend, you will have one in me." Beatrice felt tears burning at the back of her eyes. She blinked them away, not wanting to cry, not wanting to show that weakness. But Zachary saw anyway, and he moved around the fire to sit beside her. He did not touch her, did not crowd her space, but his presence was solid and comforting. "It is all right to cry," he said gently. "You have been through something terrible. You do not have to be strong every moment." "If I start crying, I am afraid I will not stop," Beatrice whispered. "Then I will wait until you do stop, however long it takes." That simple statement of patient support broke something loose in Beatrice's chest, and she did cry finally, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Zachary put his arm around her shoulders and let her weep against his chest, saying nothing, just holding her steady while she fell apart. She cried for her mother and brothers, for the father who had betrayed her, for the 3 weeks in Pettigrew's apartment, for the girl she had been before all of this happened. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and oddly lighter, as if grief were a weight she had been carrying and finally set down. When she finally pulled away, embarrassed, Zachary handed her his bandana to wipe her face. His shirt was damp where she had soaked it with tears, but he did not seem to care. "Thank you," Beatrice said, her voice hoarse. "You do not have to thank me." "Yes, I do, for everything. For seeing me when everyone else looked right through me, for treating me like I matter." "You do matter," Zachary said, and the intensity in his voice made her look up at him. "You matter more than you know." They looked at each other in the firelight, and Beatrice felt something pass between them, some current of feeling that was more than gratitude and deeper than friendship. She saw it reflected in Zachary's eyes, saw the way his gaze dropped to her mouth and then quickly away, as if he were fighting himself. The air seemed to thicken around them, charged with possibility. But Zachary stood abruptly and moved back to his side of the fire. "You should get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We have another long day of riding tomorrow." Beatrice nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that curled in her stomach. He was being respectful, she told herself. He was giving her space to heal, not pushing her into anything before she was ready. It was the right thing to do, the honorable thing. But part of her wanted him to push, wanted him to close the distance between them again, to see if that electric feeling was real or just her imagination. She lay in her blanket that night and stared up at the stars, so thick and bright they seemed close enough to touch. She thought about Zachary sleeping on the other side of the dead fire. She thought about the way he had held her while she cried, gentle and strong at the same time. She thought about the way he looked at her, as if she were precious, as if she were worth saving. "You are worth more than all the gold out west," he had said. And for the first time, Beatrice was beginning to believe it might be true. They reached Abilene on the afternoon of the third day. The town was booming, swollen with cowboys and cattle buyers, with gamblers and merchants and women who worked in the saloons and dance halls. The streets were crowded with horses and wagons, and the noise was overwhelming after days on the quiet prairie. Beatrice pressed closer to Zachary as they rode down Main Street, suddenly aware of how exposed she was, how many eyes might be watching for a runaway woman. But no one paid them any attention. They were just another cowboy and his woman, indistinguishable from dozens of others passing through town. Zachary stopped at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Alina Chen, a practical woman in her 50s who asked no questions when Zachary requested a room for Beatrice. He paid for a week in advance and told Mrs. Chen that Beatrice was looking for work, any kind of honest employment that would let her support herself. Mrs. Chen looked Beatrice over with sharp, assessing eyes. "Can you sew?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me." "Can you read and write and do sums?" "Yes, madam." "Then you can work for me. I need someone to help with the mending and the accounts. The pay is not much, but you will have your room and meals, and I do not tolerate any nonsense from the men who stay here. You will be safe under my roof." Beatrice felt tears threaten again, but she held them back. "Thank you. I will work hard. You will not regret hiring me. See that I do not." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "You look exhausted, girl. Get yourself cleaned up and have some supper. You can start work tomorrow." Zachary carried Beatrice's small bundle up to the room Mrs. Chen indicated, a tiny space under the eaves with a narrow bed and a washstand. It was clean and plain and completely hers, and Beatrice loved it on sight. "This is perfect," she said, setting her things down on the bed. "It is not much," Zachary said, looking around the cramped space with a slight frown. "It is mine. That makes it perfect." Beatrice turned to him, suddenly aware that this might be goodbye. He had done what he promised, had brought her somewhere safe. He had his own life to return to, his own plans. "Will you leave for Texas now?" Zachary hesitated, his hat in his hands. "I thought I might stay in Abilene for a while. My outfit does not need me urgently, and I could use the break from traveling. Maybe find some work around town to build up my stake." Hope flared in Beatrice's chest. "You do not have to stay because of me." "I know." He met her eyes directly. "I am staying because I want to, because I am not ready to say goodbye yet." The honesty of it stole Beatrice's breath. She wanted to say something, to tell him what it meant to her, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she stepped forward and took his hand, squeezing it gently. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and strong. "I am glad," she whispered. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, before Zachary reluctantly pulled away. "I should go find a place to stay. I will come by tomorrow to check on you if that is all right." "I would like that." He left, and Beatrice sank down onto the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the last 3 days catch up with her all at once. She was safe. She was free. She had work and a place to live and a friend who cared what happened to her. It was more than she had dared hope for when Zachary had appeared in Pettigrew's store 6 days ago. She washed her face and hands in the basin, scrubbing away the trail dust, then went downstairs for supper. Mrs. Chen served her stew and bread in the kitchen, talking all the while about the other boarders and the routine of the house. Beatrice listened and nodded and felt herself beginning to relax, beginning to believe that this new life might actually be possible. That night, lying in her own bed in her own room with the door locked from the inside, Beatrice slept better than she had in months. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Beatrice worked for Mrs. Chen, mending linens and shirts, keeping the account books, sometimes helping with the cooking when the boarding house was especially full. The work was hard but satisfying, and Mrs. Chen was fair and occasionally even kind, teaching Beatrice new stitches and praising her neat handwriting. Beatrice felt herself growing stronger, more confident, as if she were recovering from a long illness, and Zachary came to see her every day. He found work at the livery stable, caring for the horses that flooded into town with each new cattle drive. The pay was decent, and it was work he knew and enjoyed. In the evenings, he would walk with Beatrice through the streets of Abilene, showing her the town, introducing her to people he met. They would sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk for hours, about everything and nothing, learning each other slowly and carefully. Beatrice found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps on the stairs, feeling her heart lift when he appeared in the doorway with that easy smile. She had never felt this way about anyone before. The boys she had known in Leavenworth had been just that, boys, silly and awkward and uninteresting. Zachary was a man, steady and capable and deeply good in a way that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with strength. She thought he felt it too, this growing connection between them. She saw it in the way he looked at her, in the way he found excuses to touch her hand or her shoulder, in the way he listened when she talked as if every word mattered. But he did not push, did not rush. He was giving her time, she realized. Time to heal from what Pettigrew had done to her. Time to choose freely without feeling pressured or obligated. It made her love him more. The realization came to her one evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint, the sky red and gold. Zachary was telling her a story about one of the horses at the livery, making her laugh with his descriptions, and she looked at his profile in the fading light and thought, I love him. I love this man. It should have frightened her. She had known him for less than 2 months. But it felt as natural as breathing, as inevitable as the seasons changing. Of course she loved him. How could she not? The question was whether he loved her back and whether she was brave enough to say something about it. October came, and with it cooler weather and the first hints of autumn. The cattle drives began to slow as winter approached, and Abilene grew quieter, the cowboys heading back south or settling in for the cold months ahead. Zachary continued working at the livery, and Beatrice continued working for Mrs. Chen, and they continued their evening walks and long conversations. One Saturday, Zachary asked if she would like to go to the dance being held at the town hall. Beatrice hesitated, nervous about being in a crowd, about people asking questions. But Zachary promised to stay by her side, and Mrs. Chen encouraged her to go, saying she worked too hard and needed some fun. So Beatrice put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter to fit better, and let Zachary escort her to the dance. The hall was crowded with people, the air thick with the smell of sweat and perfume and lamp oil. A small band played fiddle and banjo, and couples spun across the floor in energetic reels and waltzes. Zachary led Beatrice onto the floor, his hand at her waist, and she followed his lead as they danced. She was rusty, had not danced since before her mother died, but Zachary was patient and skilled, guiding her through the steps until she relaxed and began to enjoy herself. They danced for hours, laughing and breathless, and Beatrice felt young and carefree in a way she had thought was lost forever. During a slow waltz, Zachary pulled her closer, and Beatrice rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. They moved together in perfect rhythm, and she thought this must be what happiness felt like, this full, warm feeling in her chest that made everything else fade away. When the dance ended, they walked back to the boarding house through the quiet streets. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Zachary held her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, and neither of them spoke, both reluctant to break the spell. On the porch, Beatrice turned to thank him for the evening, but the words died on her lips when she saw the way he was looking at her. His eyes were dark and intense, his jaw tight as if he were fighting some internal battle. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low and rough. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I know I said I would not rush you. I know you need time to recover from everything that happened, but I cannot keep quiet any longer." He took both her hands in his, holding them carefully as if they were fragile things. "I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that store, looking so brave and so frightened at the same time. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination to survive no matter what. I love talking to you and dancing with you and just being near you. And I know it has not been very long, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that you are worth more than all the gold out west to me. You are worth everything." Beatrice stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Happy tears this time, joyful tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been waiting for you to say something, hoping you felt the same way. I love you, Zachary. You saved me, not just from Pettigrew, but from believing I was worthless. You showed me that I deserve respect and kindness. You showed me what love is supposed to look like." Zachary exhaled shakily, relief and joy flooding his face. He cupped her cheek with one hand, his thumb brushing away the tears that spilled down her face. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Beatrice said. "Please." He kissed her softly, carefully, as if she might break. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, and Beatrice felt the last frozen places inside her melt away. She kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the touch, and Zachary made a low sound in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Beatrice was trembling. Zachary rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face. "Marry me," he said. "Not now, not until you are ready, but someday. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving to you how much you are loved." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. Someday soon." They stood on the porch wrapped in each other's arms until Mrs. Chen called from inside that it was past time for decent folks to be in bed, and they reluctantly separated with promises to see each other tomorrow. Beatrice climbed the stairs to her room feeling as if she were floating. Everything had changed so quickly. 3 months ago, she had been traded for flour, had believed herself worthless and trapped. Now she was free and employed and engaged to a man who loved her with his whole heart. It seemed impossible, like something from one of the romantic novels she had read as a girl, but it was real. Zachary was real, and his love was real, and the future stretching before them was full of possibility. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on the edge of Abilene. Mrs. Chen stood up for Beatrice, and the blacksmith who worked next to the livery stood up for Zachary. The ceremony was simple and short, but when Zachary slipped a thin gold band onto Beatrice's finger and promised to love and honor her until death parted them, she knew she was making the right choice. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell, until she thought it might burst. They had dinner at the boarding house, a celebration that Mrs. Chen organized with surprising enthusiasm. There was roasted chicken and potatoes and apple pie, and several of the other boarders toasted the newlyweds with glasses of beer. It was a modest celebration, but it was filled with genuine happiness and goodwill, and Beatrice felt surrounded by friends, by people who cared about her. That night, in the small room Zachary had rented above the livery stable, he made love to her with the same gentleness and care he had shown from the beginning. He was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and loved, and Beatrice discovered that intimacy could be something beautiful rather than frightening when it was shared with someone you loved. They lay together afterward in the narrow bed, tangled in the sheets in each other, and Beatrice felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, immediately concerned. "I am perfect," Beatrice said. "I am so happy I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real," he assured her, kissing her forehead. "We are real. This is our life now." Winter came to Kansas, bringing cold winds and snow that turned the prairie white. Zachary continued working at the livery, and Beatrice continued working for Mrs. Chen. But now they went home together each night to their small room, to their shared life. They were building something, slowly and carefully, a foundation of trust and love that would support them through whatever challenges lay ahead. In early spring, Zachary sat Beatrice down and told her about his dream of starting a ranch, of having land and cattle and a home that belonged to them. He had been saving money for years, he said, and with what they could both contribute, they had enough for a down payment on property outside of Abilene. It would be hard work, he warned. They would have to build almost everything themselves, would have to struggle through the first few years. But it would be theirs, and they would be working towards something that mattered. "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Let us do it. Let us build something together." They found 160 acres along a creek about 15 miles outside of town. The land had good grass and water, and the previous owner was selling cheap because he wanted to move to California. Zachary negotiated a fair price, and in May of 1873, they moved onto their property with a wagon full of supplies and a head full of dreams. The first year was brutally hard. They lived in a tent while Zachary built a small cabin, just 2 rooms and a loft, but sturdy and tight against the wind. Beatrice planted a garden and learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve food for the winter, to make soap and candles from scratch. Zachary bought a few head of cattle and set about building corrals and fences, working from dawn until dark every day. But they were happy. They worked side by side, exhausted and dirty and completely in love. At night, they would lie in their bed and plan the future, talking about the children they hoped to have, the larger house they would build someday, the legacy they were creating together. Beatrice marveled at how different her life was now from what it had been just a year ago. She was free and loved and building something meaningful. She was Beatrice Hawthorne, rancher's wife, and she was proud of that identity in a way she had never been proud before. Their first son was born in March of 1874, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Daniel, and Zachary held him with such wonder and tenderness that Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. Daniel was followed by a daughter, Sarah, 2 years later, and then another son, Matthew, 2 years after that. The cabin expanded with each new baby, Zachary adding on rooms whenever they could afford the materials, until it grew into a proper house with glass windows and wooden floors. The ranch grew too. They increased their herd gradually, buying heifers when they had the money, trading work with neighboring ranchers for breeding bulls. Zachary hired a young cowboy named Tom to help with the work, and later a married couple, the Johnsons, who lived in a small house. Zachary built on the property and helped with everything from cattle to childcare. Beatrice managed the household and the garden and kept the accounts, stretching every dollar until it screamed. She also taught the children to read and write and do arithmetic, determined that they would have the education she had fought so hard to keep for herself. She read to them from the growing collection of books she accumulated, stories of adventure and romance and far-off places, and she told them about their family history, about how she and their father had found each other, about the value of love and respect, and treating every person with dignity. She never told them the full story of how she had been traded for flour, could not bear to burden them with that knowledge. But she made sure they understood that freedom was precious, that every person had the right to choose their own path, that worth was inherent and not something that could be bought or sold. Zachary never let her forget that she was loved. Even in the hardest times, when drought threatened the cattle or illness struck the family, he would find ways to show her how much she meant to him. A wildflower left on her pillow, a kiss in the barn when they were supposed to be working, quiet words in the darkness before sleep, reminding her that she was worth more than all the gold out west, that she was his treasure, his partner, his heart. Years passed. The children grew. Daniel became a lanky teenager who loved working with the cattle, who had his father's steady temperament and his mother's quick mind. Sarah was bold and bright, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries in a way that both worried and delighted Beatrice. Matthew was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for gentling horses that made even the wildest animals calm under his hands. The ranch prospered. Not spectacularly, but steadily, the kind of success built on hard work and careful planning. They expanded their holdings, buying adjacent property when it came available. They weathered droughts and blizzards and cattle disease. They lost animals and money and sometimes sleep, but they never lost their commitment to each other and to the life they were building. In 1885, when Beatrice was 35 years old and Zachary was 39, they sat on the porch of their home on a summer evening watching the sun set over land that stretched as far as they could see. The children were inside doing their chores, their voices carrying through the open windows, arguing good-naturedly about something trivial. Zachary held Beatrice's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, a gesture so familiar after 13 years of marriage that she barely noticed it anymore, except that she would notice instantly if it stopped. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked quietly. "Giving up the cattle drives, the adventure, tying yourself down to a wife and children and all this responsibility?" Zachary looked at her in surprise. "Never, not once. This is everything I wanted. You are everything I wanted." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You are worth more than all the gold out west, Beatrice. I told you that the day I met you, and it is even more true now than it was then. You are my life, my love, my home. Everything good I have comes from you." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, the happy kind that came from being deeply, profoundly loved. "I love you too. You saved me, Zachary, not just from Pettigrew but from believing I was worthless. You showed me what I could be, what we could build together. You gave me a life I never dared dream of. We saved each other," Zachary said. "We built this life together, and we are not done yet." He was right. They had years ahead of them still. Years of watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Years of working the land and growing old together. Beatrice saw it all stretching before them, full of possibility and promise, and she felt a gratitude so profound, it was almost painful. Their daughter Sarah, married a schoolteacher from Abilene when she was 20. A kind young man named Robert, who loved her fierce spirit and encouraged her dreams of becoming a teacher herself. Daniel took over more of the ranch work as Zachary's back began to trouble him, proving himself a capable and fair-minded boss to the men they employed. Matthew eventually left to work with horses on a larger spread in Colorado, writing long letters home about the beautiful mountain country and the mustangs he was taming. More grandchildren came, 5 in total, bright and loud and full of energy. Beatrice delighted in them, in the chaos and joy they brought to the ranch. She taught them to read just as she had taught their parents, told them stories about their family, about the Wild West that was slowly being tamed and settled. She made sure they knew they were loved and valued, that their worth was inherent and precious. The 20th century arrived, bringing with it changes neither Beatrice nor Zachary could have imagined when they were young. Automobiles began to appear on the roads. Telephones connected distant towns. The old Wild West was fading, becoming history, something their grandchildren would read about in books rather than experience firsthand. But some things did not change. The land endured, the grass and the sky and the creek that had drawn them to this place decades ago. Their love endured, deepening with each passing year, becoming something solid and unshakable, the foundation on which everything else was built. In 1910, Zachary fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. He fought it for 2 weeks, but his lungs had been weakened by years of working in all weather, and he could not shake the infection. Beatrice sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, reading to him, refusing to let him face the darkness alone. On a cold February morning, Zachary squeezed her hand weakly and smiled at her. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear. "No regrets," he whispered. "Best decision I ever made was helping you out of that store. Best thing that ever happened to me was you walking through that door," Beatrice said, her voice breaking. "You showed me what love is. You gave me everything." "You are worth more than all the gold out west," Zachary said, the words he had spoken so many times over the years. "Always were. Always will be." Those were his last words. He died holding her hand, a slight smile on his lips, and Beatrice felt a part of her soul go with him. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But she was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren who loved her, by the legacy she and Zachary had built together. She was not alone. She lived for another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. Her children and grandchildren gathered for her funeral, remembering her strength and kindness, the way she had taught them to value themselves and others, the love she had poured into every aspect of her life. They buried her next to Zachary on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath 2 cottonwood trees that rustled in the prairie wind. The simple gravestone read Beatrice Hawthorne, beloved wife, mother and grandmother, and next to it Zachary's stone with its matching words for husband, father, and grandfather. But if you knew their story, if you understood what they had overcome and built together, you would read something more in those simple markers. You would read about a woman who had been traded for a sack of flour, and a man who had told her she was worth more than all the gold out west. You would read about love that had transformed 2 lives, about courage and respect, and the fundamental belief that every person deserved dignity and choice. You would read about 2 people who had found each other in the Wild West of 1872 and had built something that lasted, something that endured in the land and the family, and the stories passed down through generations, something precious and unshakable, forged in hardship and sustained by love. Their great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, the land passed down through the family, kept in trust for future generations. On summer evenings when the work is done, and the sun is setting over the endless Kansas prairie, they sometimes sit on the porch of the old house and tell stories about Beatrice and Zachary, about the cowboy and the woman he saved, about love that conquered everything. And they remember the words Zachary spoke all those years ago, words that became a family legend, words that captured everything important about worth and dignity and love. You are worth more than all the gold out west. Those words echo still, across the decades and the generations, a reminder that some things matter more than money or property or any material wealth. That freedom and respect and love are the true treasures, the gold that never tarnishes, the legacy that truly lasts. The story of Beatrice and Zachary is over, but the love they built continues, living on in the family they created, in the land they nurtured, in the values they instilled. They were two people who found each other against impossible odds, who chose love over fear, who built something beautiful out of pain and hardship. They were proof that worth is not determined by price, that every person has value that cannot be measured or bought or sold. They were proof that love can heal, can transform, can create something lasting and meaningful. They were, in the end, exactly what they promised to be to each other: partners, lovers, friends. Two souls who found each other in the Wild West and held on tight through everything life threw at them, building a legacy that mattered, living a love story that deserved to be remembered. And now, as the sun sets one final time on their story, we leave them at rest on their hill, surrounded by the land they loved, together for eternity as they were together in life. The wind whispers through the cottonwoods, carrying their story across the prairie, and somewhere in that whisper you can still hear the echo of Zachary's voice. You are worth more than all the gold out west. Always and forever, those words remain true.